They started a fire.
Hey, welcome back to ScreenCrush. I'm Ryan, and this is all of the Easter eggs, references, and little things you might have missed in episode 7 of The Acolyte: Choice. This was a really interesting episode that had ties to the prequels, to the sequel trilogy, and to all of Star Wars canon that we're going to discuss as we go along. And we have a lot of theories that we're going to discuss. And just a quick reminder that we just designed this new shirt, The Ability to Speak Does Not Make You Intelligent, that is at our merch store where we design all the merch ourselves. We also have our new Anakin Kill Sand parody, along with Darth Teeth's Jaws, Good Soldiers Follow Orders, and May 25th, 1977, to commemorate the release date of A New Hope. This is along with the many other classic Star Wars parody shirts that we've designed. Thanks for supporting us. The links for those are below. So the title of this episode is Choice, and it's also the theme of the episode. Several characters make consequential choices in this episode. As we saw in episode 3, Osha chooses to go with the Jedi. Her mother chooses to let her go. Sol chooses her as a Padawan. Indara chooses to keep the mission a secret. And Torben chooses to run off to destroy a witch coven because he's homesick. But more importantly, the episode shows how our choices are actually made when we are prisoners of our own points of view. Star Wars is very big on this idea, presenting events from different perspectives and showing how the truth is subjective and our choices are rarely made in black and white.
So what I told you was true, from a certain point of view.
From my point of view, the Jedi are evil!
Now, we've talked in the past about how showrunner Leslie Headland used the Kurosawa classic Rashomon as an inspiration for this show. That's a movie which presented the same events from subjective points of view. And as I've noted in past videos, we've seen the same technique replicated in The Last Jedi, when we saw different perspectives on exactly how Ben Solo left the Jedi Order. I think it's interesting that this episode is also paired with episode 3, Destiny.
What do you mean paired? Like a glass of Chardonnay with a nice dead bird?
No, I mean how every episode this season has either featured like dual opposing ideas as its title, or has an equal and opposite episode with a contrasting title. For instance, episode 1 was called Lost Found, which represented both May and Osha. Episode 2 shows different perspectives on the twin goals. One wanted revenge, the other wanted justice. Episodes 4 and 5 were called Day and Night to contrast the missions of the Jedi and the Sith. And of course, the last episode was called Teach/Corrupt to show how from one perspective, May was being corrupted, but from another, she was simply being taught by a Sith Lord. Episode 3 was called Destiny. In that episode, we saw that May wanted to stay with the Coven because she felt that it was her destiny to do so. But in this episode, Osha chooses to leave the Coven. Hence the title of this episode, Choice. And I think this is very interesting because choice and destiny represent opposing ideologies, free will and determinism, which also speaks to two different aspects of the Force. There is the living force, which is generated by all living things, and then there is the cosmic force, which guides the destiny of those living things. And as we'll talk about later on, May and Osha are a vergence in the Force, perhaps even a Force dyad. Hey Doug, you know what? You're a really great guy, and I love working for you.
Oh wow, person, that means a lot. You know, words of affirmation are my love language. What's yours?
Cereal.
Person, get serious. Cereal is not a love language.
Well, cereal's my love language. Eating a bowl of cereal always takes me back to my childhood. Waking up on Saturday mornings, watching cartoons, and by the way, I'm not alone here. I like to ask people this question a lot. I go, what's your favorite cereal as a kid? And people always have an answer. But you know, unfortunately, as adults, we can't always eat those same sugary cereals that we used to love. Until now. Because now I'm eating Magic Spoon. They're the sponsor of this video. Magic Spoon tastes like all the cereals from my childhood, but it has no gluten, no soy, and there are 0 grams of sugar. Plus, it has 13 to 14 grams of protein and 4 to 5 grams of net carbs per serving. But guys, most importantly, it just tastes so good. With Magic Spoon, you can build your very own custom box from cocoa, fruity, frosted, and maple waffle flavors, and many more. But my personal favorite is peanut butter. And now they have introduced new cereal breakfast treats. You got double chocolate, blueberry muffin, marshmallow, and chocolatey peanut butter. Each of these bars has 11 to 12 grams of protein, 1 gram of sugar, and 1 to 2 grams of net carbs. They're fueling and perfect for when I don't have time to sit down and eat a whole bowl of cereal. But most importantly, guys, Magic Spoon is fun. Like, we may be grown-ups, but you know, be the grown-up you always wanted to be when you were a kid. Eat cereal and watch cartoons. This is perfect for reluctant adults like us. So to try Magic Spoon and support our channel, use my code ScreenCrush or click the link in the description to try Magic Spoon cereal or treats today and get $5 off. You can also find Magic Spoon in your nearest grocery store. And Magic Spoon, guys, is so confident in their product, it is backed with a 100% happiness guarantee online. So if you don't like it for any reason, they will refund your money, no questions asked. So click the link in the description and go to magicspoon.com/ScreenCrush for $5 off today. Now back to what I was saying. So then we go to Bryndock 16 years in the past to finally get the Jedi's point of view on what happened on this planet. As the camera is swooping across this beautiful countryside, notice right here we see a stone altar. Now, we pointed out a similar altar in our episode 3 breakdown video. Altars like this were used by many pagans and other ancient religions for reasons that frankly we don't fully understand. The one thing that most archaeologists and anthropologists agree on is that this was to attune people to the movements of celestial bodies, just as in the episode Destiny we see the Coven of Witches preparing a ritual that involves the alignment of the moon and a planet in the night sky. And we also saw a similar altar at the Jedi Temple site in The Mandalorian Season 2. That is when Grogu was able to summon Luke Skywalker before he was captured by the Empire. And then we see our small party of Jedi that are stationed on this world. Now, as we learned in episode 3, the Coven of Witches knew that the Jedi were stationed here, but they were able to hide their existence from the Jedi, which is why later Coral mocks them.
The all-knowing Jedi were ignorant of their surroundings. I find that hard to believe.
In the glory days of the Jedi Order, it was common for the Jedi to be stationed on hundreds or thousands of worlds across the galaxy. They were usually stationed in outpost Jedi temples like the one we saw on Lothal in Star Wars Rebels, but occasionally they would be sent on research missions like this one. We actually saw a similar mission go wrong in the excellent Phase 2 High Republic book, The Quest of the Jedi. In both instances, a small party of Jedi encounter a force cult that, no spoilers, but it's a really good book. Notice Sol is holding this iPad to take readings. Now this is very much like the pad that Shmi Skywalker held during the pod race in The Phantom Menace. And I want to point out that George Lucas imagined this thing many years before iPhones and iPads were invented. Cal Naka is using a kind of metal detector, which frankly always reminds me of my all-time favorite gag from The Adventures of Pete and Pete.
Hey, we got something here! Something big! Come here!
Oh! And within the hour, we were the proud owners of a 1978 Cutlass Supreme.
Man, I used to love watching that show on Saturday mornings. Nostalgia. That evening, Indara says,
"It's unwise to insult a Wookiee's cooking."
which of course is a callback to this.
It's not wise to upset a Wookiee.
So we find out that Padawan Torben is kind of an annoying little jackass, and this actually makes him one of the single most interesting characters on this show.
What do you mean by that?
What I mean is, the Padawans always make for the most interesting characters in the Star Wars novels. The adult Jedi are usually fully formed. They're more sure of themselves. They know their place in the Force. But the Padawans are trying to figure out their path in the universe. They're tempted by romantic interests. They get crushes on people who aren't Jedi. They want adventure. They're filled with this awesome power. They don't know what to do with it. And here we find out that Torben is bored and he wants to go home. Honestly, every teenager in the world who's ever been stuck on a bad camping trip can relate to him. He says,
I'm just sick of eating Nuna legs.
and the Nuna are these little creatures that we first saw here in The Phantom Menace, but also popped up like all around Star Wars, including in the Clone Wars. I also like the small costume detail that Torben is wearing a belt buckle with the symbol of the Jedi Order. And then we start getting some very interesting information. We find out that this planet was dead because of
A hyperspace disaster.
Now right there, all my fellow book reading nerds suddenly perked up their ears. The hyperspace disaster they're referring to is the opening event of the excellent novel The Light of the Jedi, the first novel of the High Republic series. This occurred when a ship exploded in hyperspace, sending debris to different systems and nearly wiping out several planets. Saving these worlds was one of the greatest triumphs of the Jedi Order when they banded together to save planet Hetzel from annihilation. Now later, it turned out that the Nihil were secretly behind this hyperspace disaster, but you know what? We covered all of that in our High Republic explanation video. So it turns out that they're looking for
Revergence.
Hey, where have we heard that word before?
here.
I've encountered divergence in the Force.
And in The Phantom Menace, when Qui-Gon saw how high Anakin's midi-chlorian count was, he got really excited because this indicated that Anakin was a vergence in the Force. Now, this is so cool because the definition of the word vergence ties into the show's theme of duality. In a physical sense, a vergence means the simultaneous movement of the pupils of the eye toward or away from one another during focusing. In other words, a vergence is when two objects in nature that would normally be aligned are suddenly split. Similarly, Anakin was split off from the Force and formed into a human body because he was conceived by the midichlorians. And in this episode, we find out that May and Osha are also a vergence, meaning that they are pure beings created from the Force itself. Now, in many videos, we have talked about how we think that Darth Teeth is actually Darth Plagueis, and that his goal is to create a similar vergence in the Force and then use that energy to live forever. But the other definition of a vergence is the direction in which a fold is inclined or overturned. In other words, a vergence is always defined as being the forced opposite of something else, just as May and Osha are essentially copies of one another, but they're also opposites, which they summed up pretty well in their little nursery rhyme.
Always one, the Born as too.
And in this episode, they explained that a vergence in the Force is
A concentration of force energy centered around a location.
It is such a cool detail that a vergence is normally centered around a place, which is why Mace Windu is surprised to hear that a vergence is localized around a human being.
Located around a person?
And this also made me wonder if other Force worlds are considered vergences in the Force, such as Mortis, the home of the Mortis gods that we saw in the Clone Wars. Or there's also Planet X, a world from the High Republic Phase 2 that is extremely powerful with the light and dark sides of the Force. But what's most important here is that a vergence creates life. And as we've talked about on the channel before, Darth Plagueis, Palpatine's old master, was trying to perfect this technique to create life.
He could use the Force to influence the midi-chlorians to create life.
And we have been talking on the channel about how Plagueis and Palpatine were trying to create what's called a Force dyad, so together they could obtain eternal life, which is why Palpatine told Anakin this.
But if we work together, I know we can discover the secret.
I just love how this show manages to honor extended lore like the High Republic novels, while also giving us answers to questions from the prequel trilogy, but most importantly, the show is making the ending of Rise of Skywalker kind of good.
A dyad in the Force.
This episode also makes it clear that no one involved in this disaster is like an evil character. Everybody made a choice that they felt was the right thing to do. For instance, Indara teases Sol about not having a Padawan, and this establishes how much he wants someone to train. And if everybody in this show has an equal and opposite partner, you can see parallels between him and Chimere. In the present day, Chimere is searching for an acolyte, or an apprentice. And in this episode, Sol's desire for a Padawan is a form of attachment. And this makes us question his motivation. Later on, we have to ask ourselves, did the Force really tell Sol to train Osha, or was this his own desire guiding his decisions? And then he spies on May and Osha as they meet under the tree that we saw in the first scene of episode 3. Again, this is like that Kurosawa movie Rashomon, presenting the same points of view from literally different perspectives. And man, outside of the Witch Fort, we get this gate which is just some good old-fashioned Star Wars. I love how it looks industrial and lived in, like it's a steampunk door, but it also looks like the drawbridge of a castle. Star Wars designs always work best when it combines something old with something new. I also want to call out the continued use of the triangle design aesthetic that we've seen all throughout the temple in episode 3. We see triangles over the doorway, and later on in this tiny platform in the courtyard, it just kind of stuck everywhere. Triangles are traditionally a symbol of the Sith Order, so this could imply that the Force Coven is using dark side magic, magic with a K. Now, this does not necessarily mean that these witches are evil or that they're Sith. There are in fact many dark side users that don't fall to the dark side, like the witches of Dathomir, but more on them in just a second. To get inside, Sol scales this cliff like the Dread Pirate Roberts.
Look, I don't mean to be rude, but this is not as easy as it looks.
And then he spies on the Coven from overhead, echoing Obi-Wan Kenobi spying on Dooku's council in Attack of the Clones.
He's so sneaky.
In both scenes, we see Jedi discovering information about a secret organization with ties to the dark side. And by the way, I don't think this episode is revealing everything there is to know about this Coven. For instance, I definitely think the Coven intended to sacrifice these girls in order to obtain eternal life for themselves.
Oh yay! I'm a sacrifice!
And we get this weird scene where members of the Coven just stare at this hole. Now, we've seen a hole like this before on Acto's Dark Side Cave. I think the Coven drew from the dark side of the Force and then used the energy from that vergence to create May and Osha. When the Jedi are trying to figure out who the Coven are, they say,
Night Sisters.
Now, I know a lot of you already know this, but the Night Sisters of Dathomir are a group of Force users who use dark side magic. We saw them all throughout the Clone Wars, and in the show Ahsoka, we learned that they originally came from another galaxy. Now, I bring this up because I think it's interesting that Darth Plagueis couldn't use the abilities of the Sith to extend his life. I think it's going to turn out that he had to use a form of magic that was created by this Force Coven. Now, a Coven, of course, is a collective of women, and this is so appropriate because women are the creators of life. Now, these women are not the Night Sisters of Dathomir, although they also use bows and arrows as weapons like the Night Sisters. Like, you see, there are many different Force religions in the galaxy. In fact, the planet that we saw destroyed in Rogue One, Jeddah, was a kind of space Jerusalem that was a haven to many different Force religions. And hey, right here, guys, give it up for composer Michael Abels. And then Anastasia grabs Torben's mind. And guys, This is my favorite scene in this episode. This is some Star Wars. I loved this scene. This is a visualization of what it's like when someone performs a Jedi mind trick on you. And I loved how they used innovative camera tricks to show us something that we've seen before, but to present it in a visually exciting way. For instance, the way each of them are looking directly into the camera makes us immediately uncomfortable. And it also makes us feel as if Anastasia is entering our own personal space, like she is intruding in our thoughts. She says,
"Do you have natural desires you suppress?"
And you know, since this show is horny Star Wars, it's perfect that they address the fact that a teenager who's sworn to be abstinent would have natural urges. She says,
"Son of paupers from the planet Bonadon."
And actually, Bonadon was first mentioned in the now non-canon novel Han Solo's Revenge. That is the same novel where the Tenon, like Basil, first appeared. And I have to point out that on the Jedi ship, in the ceiling in the background right here, oh my god, what is that? That's a hexagon!
Oh, no, not the beast! Not the beast!
Indara reminds Sol.
Osha's too old to join the Order.
And here we have yet another parallel to young Anakin Skywalker.
He's too old.
But, like Qui-Gon before him, Sol feels like the Force is compelling him to train Osha.
I feel she's meant to be my Padawan.
I take Anakin as my Padawan learner.
And then we see Torben meditating as May interrupts him, and all of this is foreshadowing how May will kill him 16 years in the future. He takes a sample of her blood, just like Qui-Gon took a sample of Anakin's blood. And then, just as we saw in Episode 3, they performed the same test on May that they performed on Anakin in The Phantom Menace. But remember, Episode 3 was presented from Osha's point of view, but this episode is showing how events transpired from May's perspective. May says,
"Mama says Ascension means Osha and I will lead the Coven."
And I loved how vague this sentiment is. You could definitely hear the words and think that the Coven were going to sacrifice the children for their own power. So we understand why the Jedi would want to intervene. But on the other hand, this could just be some religious language that the Coven taught May and Osha. Then again, she also says,
"Mama said everyone must walk through fear. Everyone must be sacrificed to fulfill their destiny."
Which could mean that they must use fear, or the dark side of the Force, to be absorbed by the Covenant. Or this could mean that they need to conquer their fears in order to raise the Covenant to a higher level in the Force. Again, it's all very vague on purpose, which makes it perfect.
Yeah, personally, I think they're gonna kill those kids.
Yeah, they're definitely killing those kids, bro. And then we get to see what happens after Sol says,
"Then you must have the courage to tell the truth."
It's kind of tragic that Indara was the first Jedi to die, but in this episode we see that she was the most cautious and played everything by the book.
You should run the girls' blood samples. I've contacted Council for instruction.
I also like that we don't ever see the Jedi Council in this show. The Jedi Council should be kind of unobtainable, and it should be hard to reach members of the Council. It should feel like a really big deal to get an audience with them. After all, there are thousands of Jedi, and only 12 of them sit on this High Council. Indara warns Sol,
"Do not alter this little girl's destiny because you have formed an emotional attachment to her."
That is not what's happening here.
And this is such a loaded sentence. As we know, the Jedi avoid emotional attachments because this would lead them to using the Force for their own personal reasons. And Dara believes that it's Osha's destiny to remain with her people. But remember, in Episode 3, Osha's mother had a very different view of destiny.
Destiny is not decided for you by an anonymous force.
And then Torben gives us a report on the M count.
The M count is very high. Extremely high.
Wait, what's an M count?
An M count means the number of midichlorians in your blood. Remember, Qui-Gon explained it in The Phantom Menace.
Midichlorians are a microscopic life form that resides within all living cells. They continually speak to us, telling us the will of the Force.
The thing is, though, fans hate the term midichlorians so much that Star Wars is never ever going to say those words again. Instead, they just call it an M count like we heard in The Mandalorian.
I highly doubt we'll find a donor with a higher M count, though.
Essentially, though, it's a way to use biology to measure somebody's Force sensitivity, which is stupid. But here, we learned something interesting.
The symbionts are the same.
They are twins?
No, exactly the same.
The symbiotes are identical?
Identical.
Did you say symbiotes?
Yeah, you know, like in the first Venom trailer.
We call them symbiotes.
But then, you know, they changed it for the movie.
We call them symbiotes.
Symbiotes? Well, the point here is that these microscopic life forms were replicated. Just like the virgins that we discussed earlier, the twins were created to be mirror images of each other, who are defined by their separation. They are one consciousness within two bodies, a true Force dyad who were artificially created. So everything Palpatine tried to do all through the prequels and the Bad Batch, the Mandalorian, and the sequel trilogy, this Force Coven achieved that 100 years before the Phantom Menace. Palpatine's end goal was to create a duplicate, Force-sensitive clone body for himself that he could transfer his essence into, which is exactly what May and Osha are, a perfect duplicate of one another in the Force. And again, I love that Torben is such a dumb shit that he runs off half-cocked simply because he wants to go home.
Don't you see? We just need proof of a virgin, and those girls are the proof. This is our ticket home.
At the Coven, we see that May didn't lock Osha in her room because she's an evil little monster. She did this because Coral forced her to.
You want to stop Osha from leaving? Then stop her.
And then we also see that May did not start this fire on purpose. But it is interesting that when Coral manipulates May, she tells her,
"Good girl, get mad."
Because she's encouraging May to tap into the dark side of the Force. I think it's very possible that May and Osha were actually created to be embodiments of the dark and the light sides. After all, the Coven does seem to worship the yin-yang symbol, which is a sign of balance. It could even be that the creation of the twins is what made the Force go out of balance. But I got theories on the balance of the Force, and I'm going to talk about in a video we have coming out on Friday. The mother says,
"Someday those noble intentions you all have will destroy every Jedi in the galaxy."
And man, was she right. The Jedi entered the Clone Wars with the best of intentions, but the war ended up destroying the Order. As the mother tries to persuade the Coven to let Osha follow her dreams, we get a brief cameo from YouTuber Abigail Thorne, best known for her channel Philosophy Tube.
You cannot allow Osha to go.
And hey, Disney, you giving YouTubers cameos in Star Wars now, but you don't call us? Doug, what do we think about that?
You need to call us.
Call us. We Star War. We Star War very well.
We will become shills for Disney.
No, we won't.
We will not be shills for Disney.
But we will take a cameo. And how weird and cool was this scene? Now, this is very similar to the Night Sister's ability of teleportation. Now, we see this a lot in the game Jedi Fallen Order.
I can't believe this! Believe it!
However, to me, this looks like a bit of essence transfer. Essence transfer is how Palpatine moved his mind into different clone bodies in The Rise of Skywalker. I think what we're seeing here is that the twins were created from the essence of the mother. Like, notice how just for a moment the mother enters a kind of spirit form and then May follows. But this ends the moment the mother is killed, and her last words,
"It's what she wants. She chose you."
echo the final words of Qui-Gon Jinn when he told Obi-Wan to take Anakin into the Jedi Order.
He is the chosen one. He will bring balance.
And I just love how all of this was just a huge misunderstanding. I mean, Master Soul did something unforgivable. He killed a mother in front of her child, but he entered this place with only the best of intentions. And then the entire Coven takes over the mind of Kelnaka. Now, a couple episodes ago, I was a little disappointed that we didn't get to see a badass Wookiee Jedi fight. But now, I'm glad we didn't get to see that fight because then this battle would have seemed repetitive. Now, notice all these Coven members who are in a trance. All of these women appeared in Episode 3 except this woman. This is your mom. And during the fight right here, that is the theme of Kylo Ren from the sequel trilogy. This theme has now appeared 3 times in this show, and I'm starting to think, guys, I think they're doing this on purpose.
Coincidence? I think not!
So this scene explains why Kelnaka was driven a little bit mad in the present day. When we see him on Kofar, he's a hermit who is drawing the Coven symbols all over his walls. And Dara had to forcefully separate his mind from the Coven's control. And it's likely that a part of their souls stayed buried within his own mind. So in his insanity, years later, he's trying to make sense of this by drawing these symbols over and over. Soul tries to save both May and Osha, but then he has to pull a good son and choose between the ones that he likes the most. When Osha wakes up, she is wearing the same breathing mask that Luke Skywalker wore in the Bacta tank in The Empire Strikes Back. And we also see why in the future, Torben is carrying such deep scars, both emotional and physical. His impatience caused the deaths of more than 50 people. And we also see why Indara is not haunted by her actions. She did everything right, but for the sake of Osha, she decides to hide this entire ordeal from the Council, which is going to backfire in a big way because now the Council is unaware that this planet was a vergence in the Force. By keeping this location a secret, I think they're going to open up the door for Palpatine to rise to power and cause their own destruction 100 and so years in the future. And frankly, guys, the Jedi did initiate cover-ups a lot. In the High Republic Phase 2, they kept the existence of the Leveler a secret. Now, the Leveler is a monster that feeds off of the Force and reduces Jedi to dust. And in the prequel trilogy, we saw Yoda and Mace Windu decide to keep the Sith a secret from the Senate.
I do not believe the Sith could have returned without us knowing.
And in the present day of this show, Vernestra Rwoh keeps a lot of secrets from the High Council.
The High Council would be obliged to inform the Senate. A scandal like this would inspire fear and mistrust.
What we're seeing here is the Jedi beginning to play politics, which is going to become their eventual downfall. And we break with another Star Wars tradition with the end credits. This is probably one of the most controversial things in this episode. We have an actual pop song. So this song is called The Power of Two by Victoria Monet, with lyrics that present the events from this episode from both May and Osha's point of view. It's a really good song. I think it belongs in Star Wars. Let me know what you think. I got to absorb it a little bit first. But it's a definite break from several decades of established Star Wars tradition. So guys, that's all the Easter eggs we found. But if you found any, let me know in the comments below or at me on Twitter. And if it's your first time here, please subscribe, smash that bell for alerts. For ScreenCrush, I'm Ryan Airy.